Hello and welcome to another episode of Humans in 5.
We've talked about how the skeleton grows, how it looks across the spectrum of biological sex, and how the skeleton can be affected by disease. But what happens to your skeleton when you injure it?
As we've said before, bone is a living tissue. It responds to physical activity and also responds to any knocks and scrapes we go through. Just like there's a difference between a bruise and a cut on the skin, there are different grades of injury that affect bone.
One of the most common is a fracture. This happens when there's a break in bone structure. Fractures are caused by high-force impacts or can occur with a comparatively low-force impact if a person has a specific condition that affects bone strength, like osteoporosis.
Just like the different injuries you can get on skin, there are many different types of bone fractures. Compound fractures occur when the bone breaks through the skin, while spiral fractures happen when one part of the bone has been twisted, which is seen a lot in skiing injuries.
Categorizing fractures doesn't just take into account the shape and size of the fracture of the bone, but also the cause of the fracture. For example, green stick fractures are commonly seen amongst children. Due to their bones being comparatively soft, like a young green tree branch, their bone fractures but doesn't separate, connected by flexible bone tissue. Colles fractures take place at the meeting point of the lower arm and the wrist, usually as a result of putting your hands out to protect your face when you fall.
Of course, bone fractures occur in other parts than just your limbs. We humans tend to bump our heads quite a bit, and unfortunately quite a lot of evidence of violence tends to be preserved through cranial fractures. In the case of conflict, cranial fractures reflect different types of trauma.
Blunt force trauma of the skull occurs when a person is struck in the head with a firm object, such as a baseball bat. The bone fractures and fragments of bone may give sometimes some indications of the types of weapons used to inflict these wounds.
Another type of trauma sometimes seen on the skull is sharp force trauma. This happens when something with a sharp edge is connected with the surface of the skull, like a sword or a knife. This creates a mark that has a sharp edge on the skull surface.
The great thing about bone being a living tissue is that it can heal. When you fracture your bone, many different tissues start repairing activities, and we can sometimes find evidence of healing from people who've had accidents in the past.
On this picture, you can see two thigh bones. The upper bone shows a healed fracture, albeit one that isn't properly aligned. At the site of the healed fracture is a rounded mass, known as a callus. This distinctive mark is something that osteologists use to identify a healed fracture.
We don't have time to go through the many more types of injuries you can see on the skeleton, but we hope this makes you extra thankful for all the hard work your skeleton does looking after itself and you. We'll see you next time on Humans in 5.
And don't forget to subscribe!